So, Hank, take it away.
Yeah, okay, folks. So uh, I guess it's an important time in our lives to talk about scapegoating because I don't think anybody's noticed what is going on all over us. I mean, in this country, I'm not talking about Turkey or Hungary or
It
whatever, but
happens there too.
but let me start with something humorous. I did go to AI humor, and so here are some comments just to bring some levity to something serious. Scapegoating is the survival of the fittest at someone else's expense. Okay. When you're not the problem, someone else has to be. Uh, let's see. Sacrifice. It's not so funny, is it?
Depressing.
It's kind of accurate.
I know that's no, they're not funny. Okay. The AI said these are great one-liners, but no. But these are all good summaries. Let me see. Finding a weakness in another to increase your strength. Okay. So these are the simple approach to it. But let me get so what I decided to do is put together a little summary, and I'm calling it the scapegoating mechanism. Serves to alleviate tensions and internal conflicts arising from excessive sameness or excessive individuality or differences in small and large groups. So I think we all know this if you haven't studied it intuitively. And so I ask you all to think about, growing up and going to school and university and dealing with colleagues and the whole deal and running a business or whatever, how that operates in family. Anyway, okay. So let's see if I can do this. I'll skip through some. But scapegoating is a psychological and social phenomenon where individuals or groups direct blame and hostility towards a particular person or group to manage internal conflicts, anxiety, or social tensions. From an evolutionary biology and psychology perspective, it operates as a mechanism to alleviate tensions arising from excess homogeneity or excesses over individuality within groups. Let's see. Summarize it. In order, well, let's just read it. Humans have evolved in environments where cooperation within small groups was necessary for survival. So we all know it. This created strong in-group, out-group dynamics where individuals, you can see me? Yeah, okay. Where individuals identify strongly with those who share similar traits, homogeneity, and may feel threatened by perceived outsiders. We're calling it, from the evolutionary perspective, diversity. And I think I'll say it later, but diversity is some of us might be more aware of it than me, is necessary, is chosen in evolution, in Darwinian evolution, for fitness. Scapegoating function comes up when tensions arise, when too much sameness leading to boredom or lack of innovation. So that's a practical one. Or too much difference leading to conflict or dissension. And the groups might project their frustrations into an outsider or less conforming member, creating a scapegoat. When I read something, there are sort of scapegoating, there's some social psychology on people present themselves, or groups present themselves as victims. So I don't know much about it, but I see that with individuals, and so they're wearing a target on their bodies to be bullied or something. So we need a common adversary. There's competition of resources for resources. In homogeneous groups, resource allocation may become contentious as members vie for limited opportunities for limited opportunity. Heterogeneous groups, differences may lead to miscommunication or distrust. So the main thing here is to blame somebody else to feel better or make sure we get a piece of the pie and that the other person doesn't get too much of the pie. So evolutionary wise, and then I want people to think about also the what do I call it, the evolutionary mismatch that I'm not going to say much here, but we've been studying that about what happened back to the hunter-gatherers and that early group, and what's happening in large systems now, whether it's nation states or what's going on in the world and globally. Okay, so people want to hang together. We like when we're alike. We have similar, we have something in common. We like to bowl together. We like to smoke dope together. We like to have, enjoy ourselves over dinner, eat the same meal, whatever. But that can get, and this is where Girard comes in. He calls it his mimetic theory. He makes a big deal out of what these people I read are making it more basic, but there's some danger in sameness, and that he thinks that's he differed from Freud, and he goes, the hell with the Oedipal complex. He goes, that's a bunch of crap. It's the sameness, and because Freud doesn't say much about our involvement in groups or those people. He does a little bit in his group psychology, but so basically, the basic premise I think we're all familiar with, that we need a scapegoat. Or I once was at a conference, about 30 years ago in the psychoanalytic world, and they call it the need for an enemy. And these people didn't understand evolutionary biology or psychology. So here's something. In small groups, you can kind of, who the scapegoat is. We know the people targeting them, and it only gets institutionalized at a very small, obvious level. There are explicit norms, implicit, but it's not hard to figure out how to avoid getting scapegoated unless you might put yourself into being a victim position. But in large groups, as we know what's going on now, scapegoating can take on a more systemic form. Whatever it's called, racism. Okay, so larger societal issues or institutions may emerge as scapegoats for complex problems, or economic difficulties, or social upheaval. Blaming a specific demographic or minority can unify the larger group by allowing them to channel their frustrations externally, avoiding introspection or critical evaluation of group dynamics. And that's a high-level moral arc to think that this is going on with awareness. That's the whole thing about Girard, that this all goes on without awareness. So thanks for letting me, having done this homework and enjoy doing it. And then think about again, what it was like being around, seeing scapegoating. What did you do about it? Were you an upstander or a bystander? Okay. Any reflections, observations? Hi, new people.
Hands up.
Oh, I do that way?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think Rob and then Diane sooner.
Well, a lot to say about this.
Yeah.
I got interested in the etymology of the word scapegoat, which of course comes from the word escape. And escape is a really interesting Latin word because it means to shed your clothes when somebody's grabbing at you and escaping and getting away. So in a certain sense, I guess a scapegoat is something that gets away. It was initially driven out, sent into the wilderness, after the priest had symbolically laid the sins of the people upon it. So did the goat escape? Or did the society escape by sending the goat away?
I vote for number two, the latter.
I thought it's the people doing the scapegoating who are escaping something, escaping responsibility.
Well, that's the literature. Yeah. But intuitively, well, if you make it out of prison, you get to escape the persecution. So you do get to escape. You know, you make it out of a persecutory group.
But it's escape. It's releasing your cape and getting away from it. So you're leaving behind something.
But there's also a reason why it's goat.
Goats are cheap.
No, I think
Sacrificial.
this is not the reason I raised my hand. I want to talk about something else, but I mean, if we're doing etymology and word analysis, I think it's even in the Bible or something.
Yeah.
That
Leviticus
a
16.
village or something sort of symbolically loads its sins onto a goat and chases it out of town.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
it's a group action for sure, and but Girard, I think, is right about it having this sort of transcendent sacred nature, as well as can I just barrel ahead and go into what I was going to say in the first place, which is it's not clear to me from what Hank was saying that there's any difference between a group turning on a non-conforming person who's actually violating the norms. I've been through, in the course of my career, a couple of times when a department that I was in decided that one of the members was doing something either unethical or violating the rules in another way. And the whole group turned on that person and, literally excluded them by pushing them out. And I observed that what happened afterwards was that there was more group solidarity because everybody had participated in this business of getting rid of somebody. But this wasn't an innocent scapegoat. It was a guilty party who was being extruded from the group. So is scapegoating about both of these things, or is it only about the selection of an innocent or irrelevant victim? Ken's nodding his head to that, and I'm inclined to believe that that's what we should be talking about.
Well, let me just say, how do we do this? I mean, it's a very good question for us to, I mean, I can give my impression, but two other people want to speak. How should we do this? Follow up on Diane or let everybody as we usually do? Steve?
You're muted,
Yeah,
Steve.
let's stay with one thought for a moment.
Okay.
I think there's a difference, Diane, between blaming and expelling somebody who is blameworthy, right? They've done something wrong, so therefore the group punishes them by expulsion or ostracism of some kind. But I think that the mechanism of scapegoating is, at least in my understanding, is directed at somebody who's innocent of any wrongdoing, but through being different or being weak in some way, offers themselves up, to use another animal metaphor, as the sacrificial lamb, on which the group's sins and troubles are projected onto that person with the dynamic that if we can get rid of this person, then we will get rid of our sins, we will get rid of our problems. And of course, since that's false, that only provides temporary relief. So either the scapegoating needs to continue, as it did in Nazi Germany, or after a new scapegoat will need to be found eventually.
Right. Periodical scapegoating.
Are we
Yeah.
staying with this topic, Ken, or should we shift?
Well,
Anybody
well,
want to?
I just wanted to add something to what Steve said, and that's that the individual that is selected for scapegoating is someone who generally is someone who is not greatly respected in the group, but hasn't really done anything that would justify his expulsion. Therefore, he's selected because of his unpopularity, and his egregious behavior is exaggerated or even manufactured.
Or
But
hers
I
in the
was going to,
case of witchcraft.
well, sure. Um, I was going to say that, it seems to me that there are two kinds, I could be wrong, two kinds of scapegoating going on. One, there's individual scapegoating, the kind I just described, and group scapegoating, which to me seems to be driven much more by our tribal cognition. And for example, you have, in Middle Ages and anti-Semitism, you had back in those days, what held the group together was the religion and the monarch. And you needed to have primary allegiance to the monarch and to the religion. And Jewish Ashkenazi communities did not do that. In Europe, they tended to be insular and practice their own religion. And so they were perceived as not being, quote, part of the group.
They were different.
They were different. Perhaps this does mimic the individual thing. You have someone whose behavior is not, you have a group whose actual behavior does not justify bad action, but you exaggerate it when an opportunity comes. And you need in the Middle Ages, people also needed simply to explain what was going on with the Black Death, and they needed to rationalize, and they did so by expressing their tribal cognition, I guess. I'm just at this point, I'm just guessing, so I'll let the next person go.
Yeah, well, I would just say from the my excessive studying this, I've also been paying attention to it on the individual level. So maybe we'll bring it up later. But you're basically covering it on what Gerard says, or these other theorists and writers and scholars are saying, and they're trying to validate it through other theories and collect evidence. But Kathleen?
You're muted, Kathleen.
I was just I was recalling something from I think it's Beck's its basic theory is that the scapegoating it has a purpose of uniting a group. So it can be arbitrary. It's not necessarily based on somebody's different in an unpleasant way, or they're offensive in some way. The women healers in the Middle Ages were just they might have been older women on their own or whatever, but they weren't in any way deserving of being burned to death. It was a way of driving unification of the larger group, and sometimes through intimidation. I want to bring up a word. I didn't finish the Gerard article, but in the very beginning, he mentions the word, I think it was intra-individual psyche or something like that. And I'll look for it, but I'd never heard that phrase before. And, my degrees are in psychology, and that's what I've been involved in all my life. And I think that's a very interesting word, intra-individual. It refers to, the way the group, through this mimesis, the tendency to mimic, which of course is related to the underlying brain function, mirror neurons firing as a way of learning and identification. It has to do with deep identification. We need to feel that we belong. and it can help us feel like we belong if we can just identify who doesn't belong. And so I do think that's pretty pervasive in both individual and group psychology.
I say, look, before Steve, I like to, I know Steve does this sometimes, ask people who have not spoken yet to consider speaking. So in the meantime, oh, Kathleen, and then
I
Steve.
can't hear anybody.
No, I was only
Oh.
saying yes. Do a round where people that haven't spoke are invited to speak. I think that's a good idea.
So Kathleen, I don't know, Steve, can you wait for after Sage or?
I
Yeah,
don't
I
know what
can wait.
happened. I couldn't see anybody for a while. So now I'm just coming back in. So I don't know what I missed.
Oh,
Steve, why don't you go?
I just had a very quick comment that popped into my head as Kathleen was talking about mirror neurons. So interestingly, mirror neurons are in some way involved with, contribute to, or are responsible for something like scapegoating, but also its opposite, which is empathy.
Mm.
So it's just interesting
Yeah.
that there's two sides to the coin of mirror neurons. Usually, it's only the positive side that's discussed, which is the way it contributes to
yeah.
to empathy.
You know, Steve and others,
Yeah.
when we were just comment, there's a book out, I forget the guy's name. It's called The Dark Side of Empathy. And so when we did something on empathy, I mentioned it, but he talks about how we get to, he has a term, he has a whole bunch of terms in his literature, and he calls one, I can't remember all of them, but sadistic empathy. In other words, in empathy, you tune in to the other, and then it's what you do with your. See, the way I understand empathy from these people is empathy is about mimicking, and then the contagion of it, and we absorb the contagion, and then some part of us does something with it. So look, sorry, but I'll bring up Trump. Look what he's got great empathy. He picks up shit. He picks up a zeitgeist, and he knows how use it. I don't know, to destroy it. I'll use that. But yeah, so there is this whole dark side and scapegoat empathy and this mimicking. That's why I like Girard. The mimicking is a more basic thing than most psychology recognizes. Oh, Sage, yeah.
So related to mirror neurons, and also Hank, your statement about, needing the Black Plague and needing something to blame. I've been reading, actually listening to Ted Chiang's book Exhalation, which I recommend to listen to because it's very visual. And there's one story at the end, I'll just give like a quick description of the back. The idea is that there are this product called the prism, and when you activate the prism, it does a quantum computation, and one of two lights will flick on, and at that moment, there will be a parallel self on another timeline of yourself. And you can talk to that self and what's going on in their timeline from that point on through the prism. And there is a prism help group, like therapy group, because and in general use of it, the point he's trying to make, I think, that relates to scapegoating is the people start using these to investigate alternative scenarios, what might have been. And they look at things, and they look at sports players, they look at historical events, they look at decisions, and he's talking about the profundity of how small changes can just lead to, in very quickly, completely different scenarios and outcomes. And basically, it creates a profound sense of the more like broader picture of like when anything happens and we try to create a scapegoat, it's it's us reacting to the version of the thing that happened. And we might be then focused on identifying that or blaming that, causing that, but we fixate on the particular of what we experienced often and get stuck to understand that you know, it could have just been another way. We're basically creating an entire set of norms and expectations about something that, you know, is just what happened. Not even necessarily, we don't have a sense of likelihood.
Now, Sage, is this a nonfiction?
It's fiction. He's a great
Oh,
science.
it's fiction. I was just wondering. Yeah,
Imagine.
wasn't sure.
Well, I hope that's
We're not there yet.
Well, there are, you know, about, I just came across something. It's a little on your point. There's a bunch of research in England. This is in psychiatry about doing avatar therapy with people who have, people in the, you know, the schizophrenic realm who have auditory hallucinations. So you create your own, the therapist, whoever helps the patient create avatars, and it's the kind of a part that they have a whole relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like absurd. I guess the point is that it creates a sense of absurdity around a scapegoat because you see, well, in this world, see, I didn't do it. It was actually because of that, or no,
They
actually,
have, yeah.
I only did it once out of many versions, so I'm actually not a bad person. It was a fluke, like just constant. So the uncertainty of that, and I think so to me, it's like what degree of scapegoating becomes healthy
Right.
versus, you know, fixated.
I'll just respond to it then, Steve and Diane. I don't know, some of you may not have been around, but Flip Wilson was a comic way back, and his shtick was the devil made me do it. You know, I think Steve and then Diane.
Well, just a comment and then a question I'd like to toss out, but we might want to come back to it depending on what Diane wants to say. So, you know, when we're talking about societal level scapegoating, we're talking about life and death for people. And the psychological forces behind scapegoating are really, really powerful. It's primarily, I think, motivated by a need to feel that bad things are not random, that you know that bad things are caused by bad
That's right.
people. So if we get rid of the bad people, I can, you know, not be scared anymore. And it also, I think, is caused by a unwillingness to look in the mirror and see that you know, you may have a role in why the bad things are happening. But given the magnitude of scapegoating, and I think we could see that going on with immigrants in America right now. And given the psychological forces behind it, the question I'd like us to discuss at some point in our conversation today is how do we combat it? What do those of us who see it going on, how do we, at a societal level, I'm talking about, and we can talk about that historically, how have other societies combated it, but how can we combat the scapegoating that's going on now in America?
So before Diane, I just want to say we're talking about, we could do a whole year on actionable strategies to combat scapegoating, but that's another, yeah, but that's a project. Diane?
Well, it is possible that what I'm going to ask, what I'm going to ask may have something to do with solutions. A very important part of Girard's theory is how this turns into a sacred, into the manufacture of sacredness. And it struck me while I was reading this article, well, this is about sacrifice. And I thought, I'm a little bit interested in religions these days for other reasons, but I thought about the three Abrahamic religions. They all are centered on sacrifice. And basically the idea of human sacrifice. It starts with the sacrifice of the son who ends up being replaced by the lamb or ram or whatever it is in Jewish religion. In the Christian religion, it actually is the sacrifice of not only a person, but a sacred person. In Islam, again, it goes back to the ram, and there's the sacrifice holiday. You're all familiar with the Hajj, where sacrifices are made, and so it's all basically within the same sort of mythic tradition. That is a potential solution to the need for scapegoats, because you can always take refuge in your religion and say, this sacrifice has been made, this sacrifice has been accepted by God, and so forth. But on the other hand, it doesn't really prevent this need coming up over and over. So we have, witch trials and purges from the party, and this, that, and the other. What I'm trying to put out there is the symbolic significance rather than just the action itself, or the suffering on either side, or the psychic satisfaction.
Well, I'm going to suggest something. This is my comment before we move on. I suggest we do something on the, I don't know the word, but I just made it up. The sacredization of the sacred, because that's what René Girard talks about. And there's another guy, forget his name.
Sacralization, probably.
Sacralization. There's another guy, he's an anthropologist, get his name now, but he talks about sacred values. And there's something about, you're called, no, before, after him, a modern guy. He's French, he's American. Who?
Well, John Haidt talks about it.
Him too, yeah. Okay, but I wanted to say that that's a powerful thing. Maybe somebody can do something about the mystification of the sacred. I don't know if they're the same, but I think it's. I've been interested in that for a long time. Alan, I think. Hello.
You're muted, Alan.
Yep. Got it. Goes in the opposite direction of what we were just going, where Diane was taking it. I mean, if we look at the politics of scapegoating, it's pretty much got to be somebody that doesn't have the power to redefine the narrative. The trans kids, boy, are they scary, for example, when, a tiny segment of the population becomes sort of the whipping boy in a political context for people's anxieties about gender. So, and immigrants are another example. It's pretty predictable that they're a target frequently because they don't have as much power as, but the trans kids are even better because they got no power.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's somebody sent me a little blurb, and I can only paraphrase it. This is not a statement about a belief in a God. This is the way it's being talked about. That stop using God to bless you to kill your enemies. Okay, there's something about, now, is God sacred? I don't know, but it could be, it could not be, but that's another question. So, but yeah, that's how the God becomes sacred, and you can use it to have an enemy and scapegoat the enemy and feel better about yourself. Kathleen?
Well,
There are two
sorry,
Kathleen.
I think Walsh was.
Yeah, so we'll have to. Don't worry, I don't think I'll be coming to many of these groups. The Kathleen one.
Please come.
I was going to actually say something similar to what Alan was picking up on, and I disagreed with as what Steve said about, people need to have an answer to why do bad things happen to good people. I don't think people are that innocent. I think ultimately it's always all about power. And I do think people need to feel empowered, and that is a healthy need, and it's a healthy impulse for people to feel like they have some control in their lives. They can make choices, or they can predict what's going to happen to them. They can protect their children, for example. But I think that scapegoating is more about having a sense of power. over the bad things that are going to happen. Whether or not you deserve them is another question. And I really appreciated what Alan just said about picking on the most vulnerable and least impactful segment of our society. This is really bringing people together. Getting rid of DEI programs in the schools. Some communities are really feeling good about that. But it also occurs to me, being a mental health person, that it's an expression of what we call the Karpman triangle, after the psychologist that invented it. The dynamic of the three roles in a relationship that is intended to just be between two people, or to take it up a level abstractly to two groups. You bring in that third force and then initiate the victim, persecutor, rescuer triangle. The victim and the rescuer, they get to be buddy-buddy. And any of the three role holders can trigger the dynamic of bringing the rescuer and the victim together. The persecutor can do it, heavy-handed. Persecutor can bring that together. That's true abuse. The rescuer can marginalize the child's father that's upset about the child's drug use by colluding with the child and hiding drug use from the other parent, or bringing the child into his or her relationship with a partner with a drug problem by complaining to the child and not directly dealing with the adult that they're in a relationship with. And that happens at the macro level too, in terms of countries. I mean, my dad was born in 1919, and I grew up very early on. He was sort of a bohemian, independent bohemian thinker, being introduced to the Holocaust, being shown pictures of emaciated bodies being dumped out of the back of trucks into gaping holes, like when I'm 8 years old. And when he's telling me this really happened, and you really need to understand that this really did happen, because I think he was really disturbed by probably his own impulses as a very handsome, smart, blonde, blue-eyed Australian guy in the 20s and 30s that might have identified with the idea of an Übermensch, or the people that deserve to be in power and in charge. So anyway, I can go on forever, and I won't, but I think that's important to keep the idea of power and manipulating the dynamics to achieve power. And I personally think that is also true in religion, and the idea of sacredizing certain things.
Well, just to say just a comment on the mental health level, there's people may not be aware of this concept, but many might be. The multiplicity of self concept. Steve, have you come across it that way? But basically it means where there's no one unified self. Well, if there's a unified self, that's fine with me. But the multiplicity of selves, we have many parts. And so the practical theories like internal family systems theory, or parts dialogues, or what's his name, Gestalt guy, Fritz Perls, they took that stuff. And so there's a whole thing that your internal world is filled with many parts, like a whole group. And then the parts, there's a scapegoat part. Or I have a guy, he does pretty well in life, but mostly he likes to have fun. And that affects his ability to, let's say, have better relationships, and especially messes up his ambitions for his career, but he's always wants everything to be fun. Okay, so there's multiplicity of selves, but I don't know what to say about it from an evolutionary point of view. I'm going to do the work on it, but I'd be happy to present that. But it's not in our domain about evolutionary psychology or biology. I think let's go to Tim, because you didn't speak yet.
Sure. I'm going to try my best to explain my thought. I'm thinking about this from a relational frame theory, which is embedded in, has evolutionary, reticulated evolutionary perspectives to it. Like I was thinking that, like, in the sense of, here's this system of a group that's preserving a degree of sameness by coordinating, like I'm the same, by creating a frame of distinction with another person, whether it's a frame of distinction or me being different or this other person being opposite, or this other group being opposite of me. And in that sense, what it's doing is, as I'm seeing, is like it's the system that's being preserved based on whatever the group is coordinating with. So it's perpetuated because by the coordinating the sameness, that's what keeps it going. And it could be, this group, for examples of, this is we're preserving something, they're destroying. We're strong, they're weak. They're moral, or we're moral, they're immoral. So it's this issue of sameness that's being preserved and how it's articulated that needs to be perpetuated in that coordination that's supported by either it's me different, which there's degrees of, or they're different, which there's degrees of, or they're opposite, which is more on the extreme end of it. Is my thought kind of coming across?
Oh, to me, it's clear. I don't know if people want to address it, or I could say something. I was thinking on a more mundane, everyday level.
Yeah.
It's called the right thing to do, like explicit norms or manners, from the 1800s. Whatever culture you're from, you have your spoon on one side, your fork on the other side, you dress a certain way. Sameness is homogeneity is useful. But let's say on family levels, I have similar qualities to my parents, are also very different. Luckily, I didn't get scapegoated for it, but because they weren't bad things, but they weren't appreciated because I wasn't the same enough. And I saw in my family with my sister, she's a whole different personality. She became more the same. She became more than the same of them. So it's there on every levels, and that sameness is it's both constructive and promotes pro-sociality, and it promotes maybe scapegoating when it gets too far. Appreciate that. I think Rob
And Kathleen.
Rob,
other
he
Kathleen.
doesn't hear.
I'm here. You can't see me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Rob doesn't hear. I don't
Okay,
think Rob.
sorry, I couldn't unmute.
Ah,
Okay, I'll try and be quick because I want to hear what Kathleen has to say.
Go.
René Girard was famous also for his concept of enemy twins.
yes.
And I think this is a really important thing to talk about in terms of mirror neurons, among other things. But I want to tell a quick anecdote. I was working I was doing a seminar in Çatalhöyük in central Turkey in around 2010. And there was a guy there, a French philosopher, and he was working or being paid by a foundation at Stanford University called Imitatio, which was founded by a student of René Girard named Peter Thiel, who was Elon Musk's partner in PayPal and the guy who was graciously given J.D. Vance. Thank you very much. This French philosopher, Jean-Pierre, was very interested, and we were at Çatalhöyük, and then we were traveling in Eastern Turkey. And leaving all that to one side, he was very interested in the whole idea of violence, because I think that's a very important concept in René Girard's structure of thought. And he said, there must have been a lot of violence here. And I said, well, we'll have dinner with Ian Hodder, who directs the site, and you can ask him, but I bet he's going to say no. So it was a delightful dinner. He said, there must have been a lot of violence. And Ian Hodder said, no evidence of it whatsoever. So the idea that he was being paid by, in effect, Peter Thiel to attend this conference and really wanted to push the idea that people were naturally violent. Didn't work out so well. But the influence of René Girard's thought on the extreme right seems to be fairly profound.
Well, just a little bit of a side story on him. I don't know. I came across that a while ago. I didn't look it up, but I don't know if he was what he was on. I don't think he was a religious guy in France, but he decided. I can't tell you it's good to look it up. He decided that in order to deal with violence and sacrifice and all that, the best religion was Roman Catholicism. Okay, that's all I remember of the blurb that I read about, but I didn't get into the explanation as to why he picked anything, but why he picked that one from being a non-religious guy. But something about his sacred, and he was drawn to the sacredness of and the sacrifice of Roman Catholicism. So, yeah, Kathleen Hart.
What you just said totally blew my mind. I mean, it made me think of the novel The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark, in which, it's a girls' school in Scotland and a female teacher's relationship to a group of students she picks out to be in her group. And one of them they marry is always being blamed for things because she's not too bright and she's clumsy. But when you said that, something was strange to me, which is that it ends with one of the girls embracing Catholicism and becoming a nun. And I'm just wondering if it has to do with what you just said. But anyway, the whole idea of being saved, right? It's based on the idea that other people are not. So if you can be saved religiously, you can feel like you're safe, but it depends on other people not being saved. So that's the thing about Christianity, or at least, Orthodox Christianity, that you have to have this idea that there are going to be people out there who won't be saved because they're not going to embrace it. It's not the beliefs. It's got to absolutely be the name of the religion or the name of the God that saves you. I forgot what I was going to say.
Let me think. What I'm thinking about talking about religion. I think everybody here is familiar with Calvinism. Whatever. What is that? 1700s. But anyways, the whole elitist thing. Who are the what's the language? Who are the elect? I think is the language, folks. Whoever remember it. And I think the Protestant ethic is sort of the myth of that stems from that. And there's those who are favored by God are doing well. They're chubby, they're eating well, they're not starving, everything is going well for them. So what happens to the others?
Calvinism is the theme of that novel too. Fascism. It brings together fascism.
Wow.
Yeah, like one of the girls keeps thinking the group of girls is the fascisti.
Oh.
Calvinism assumes that there are an elect and a damned from the get-go.
That's right.
So it's not. Yeah. It's somewhat heterodox in the broad sweep of Christianity.
Right.
Point of information.
Okay. So we got Steve and Diane. Sooner.
Well, I'm going to take another run at this because I think we've completely avoided the question that I asked everybody to talk about. And I'd like to blame one of you for that, but I can't decide who to scapegoat, so I'll let it go. But the question
who's going to volunteer for Steve?
a sacrificial lamb. I'm a host of the Zoom, so I can expel somebody if it would make me feel better, but I won't go ahead and do that.
Well, we can see how it works. It would be like a lecture demonstration.
But the question again is, on a societal level, given the magnitude of harm that is caused by scapegoating an entire group of people, what can we do to combat that? Because it doesn't seem like we're, at least in America at the moment, doesn't seem like we're being very successful at that task.
Well, I can answer that question. I forgot. It's so simple. All right.
Okay.
No, but I'm serious, even though it's not simple. But I use these. Huh? Oh, so I come across, I guess, in some Holocaust studies, modern time, they're talking about in the terms of the Jewish people and their dilemma. It's like never again thing. So they have a thing about there are two types. You're a bystander and you're an upstander. Are people familiar? Basically, the upstander is willing to risk something in order to disrupt the equilibrium, the destructive equilibrium. And the bystander is going to go, I'm okay, it's not so bad. And I think, I've been thinking, I'm not doing anything, but I do think, and we do need to, especially with the Trump administration, and I have clients who have gotten really upset, and one guy goes, I feel like a coward. I'm 79 years old, I live a good life, I don't want to mess it up, so I'm not going to say anything. And then imagine getting a group together other than a march that says, so maybe we can, I don't know what Diane wants to address, but it's a
real quick, Hank,
it's the hardest thing. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're talking about bystander, there's the famous quote, and I don't know who said it, about when they came for the Jews, I did nothing. When everybody know the one I'm referring to. I did nothing until they came for me.
Yeah. So I don't know. We should probably have something on that phenomenon, because most books that I read, they have great ideas, great surveys. You people who publish a lot, and then you have, well, they got a paragraph. Well, we got to do something about it, but I have no answers, or just reflect. What's this? Yuval Harari, who's quite a major pessimist about what's going to happen. So people ask him, what are you going to do? He says, I meditate every day. I'm a Buddhist. So
I don't want to jump the queue. I think other people are waiting, but I can't wait to weigh in on this, because I had also noticed, like you, Steve, that we hadn't answered that. But there was a few other people that were going to speak that were waiting, and I don't want to go ahead of them.
Okay, Diane.
Go ahead, Kathleen. I don't have a solution.
You're not going to do something about this, Diane? You're not going to offer guidance to Steve and myself?
What I was going to say was that, because we don't have that much time. It's only a minute that people have to leave. That's why I like the pro-social.
We go to 12:30 now, Kathleen.
Yeah.
We go to 12:30
is anybody
people
leaving?
can stay.
Hold on.
I thought it was an hour with an optional half hour.
Yeah. Well, I'm asking, is anybody leaving now? So don't rush, Kathleen. We're staying till 1:30.
Thank you. I was thinking, that's why I like the pro-social worldview. And I know everybody in this group is not necessarily familiar with it, but I, as somebody that has studied systems, family systems, larger systems, and, pathology, social pathology for a long time, I think the core design principles, when they're translated, when they're generalized to action groups, or just just applied to people working together, as I think it was David Sampson said in Our Tribal Future, those dynamics, those social dynamics, that it do include inherent values in terms of people having a level of autonomy or semi-autonomy over their lives, there being a fair and inclusive decision-making governance system, there being equitable distribution of cost and benefits, shared identity and purpose, monitoring of agreements, graduated responses to agreements. Those are norms. Those are social norms that can allow people to not just be bystanders, because it's not just, oh, I'm comfortable with my life and I don't want to speak up. Quite often, if I speak up, I'm going to die. And in those, even though I'm a pretty outspoken person, I know that in certain circumstances, I would be smart enough not to say anything. So there's social norms that I believe that the pro-social theory has that can be more directly applied to groups, but and those norms themselves around what is abuse and what is unacceptable. I mean, those
Kathleen, maybe because I know this is a whole. I mean, I've studied some of it. I'm not a member of it, and I have a lot of questions about the validation of that system. So don't talk to me about it that way. But I think, what's your point about facilitating upstanding through the design principles? Is there something in there other than the specific?
Yeah, monitoring agreements inherently, theoretically encompasses all kinds of agreements. The golden rule: do unto others as you do to yourself. Don't hate your sister. Don't shoot your neighbor. If you think your the 16-year-old that knocks on your door is going to come and kill you, and then you're going to be able to shoot that person, maybe you'll get convicted of murder, like what just happened with the
all right, but so you're saying,
I'm just saying norms themselves
but
can empower
Kathleen,
people to speak up.
but we need to move on. But I'm saying, you're suggesting that these design principles could help you be a laboratory for developing upstanders. That'd be a good concept to ask all the people writing about it. I don't think so, but you got to do something.
Well, I'm expressing my opinion whether or not you think and I understand that a lot of people that are in the group are not agreeing with me.
No, it's not a matter. Kathleen, it's not about a matter of agreeing you. I think it needs to have a discussion and really put forward how these design principles. That's all.
Yeah, well, I think Tim referred to it when he talked about relational frame theory. There is a lot of research about how those principles are applied in different settings and how they can change. And it's being used in mental health systems, for example. Hank, you remember, what's his name? Liebert, the psychiatrist on the East Coast who applies these principles in psychiatric settings with disturbed adolescents and their families. So, there's a lot of information about.
We're talking global. We're talking global stuff, one small group at a time. But let's go on to Tim and Kathleen.
Yeah, I would say that the comparison is a low complex binary comparison. And so in my perspective, from a relational frame theory perspective, is that some of the ways of addressing it, from like maybe the science, like the science underpinning pro-social, are really looking at increasing complexity, having conversations that shift away from this binary frame of coordinate, like the in-out groups, issues around like frames around time, because time changes, or hierarchical, like looking at the bigger picture, or causality, looking at cost. So there's lots of different things that can be done in terms of how we hold conversations to increase complexity. And values in principle are considered motivational, augmental motivators, in the sense of, we don't see costs or benefits always, but it still motivates us if we connect with a value. So we need to see like what these are as tools, and not just blindly like apply certain interventions or approaches, and understanding what is the problem here, and how do we kind of look at it in saying like what is it doing and what sustains it, in order to kind of really look at like what to do. But I have to step out, but I appreciate your time.
Well, Tim, this is not like, this is just a way of thinking. It's a thought experiment. It'd be interesting if you use these concepts, or Kathleen, the underpinnings pro-social, or the way you're describing it, and how to facilitate being upstanders and challenging what's the status quo or what's evolving. These are all good things to talk about, but it's kind of applied pro-sociality and principles, or I don't know, would you be interested in, I'm not asking if you're going to do it, but does that sound like an interesting concept to use these underlying evolutionary concepts of scapegoating and how ubiquitous that stuff is? Because that's what I was going to call this thing, the ubiquity of scapegoating, and like, how do you tackle that as part of creating upstanding? Does that sound of interest, Tim? I mean, I don't know what do you do?
I mean, I have to think a lot more deeply about the idea.
I don't know. Let us know. I think Kathleen, and then Steve.
Well, I think why Harari is doing a lot of meditating is because the whole forum, for conversations at all, is hijacked by billionaires buying Twitter, and the ability to assign scapegoat, designations, it's backed up by an ability to go right into the treasury and find everything. The digital world is really turning everything upside down in terms of how we can manage anything. Sorry for that cheerful comment, but
Well, there's in the therapy business, they call it negative cognitions and positive cognitions. So if you can turn that into, or I could turn it into a positive suggestion.
please do.
No, I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody can do it, but I think of course it's negative, but we got to face the demons and we got to understand the demons in order to, what we're talking about, doing something about it. Thanks. Steve?
Well, again, thinking about how to answer the question I posed, I was thinking about, what can we teach children in the public school system? And that led me to think about the anti-bullying work that's been done now quite extensively in most public schools. And there's some similarity between bullying and scapegoating, but there are some significant differences. In the paper that you had us read, Hank, there's also a discussion of Wrangham's theory, which I am more prone to think in Wrangham's terms than Girard's. And what's interesting is that although both of them suggest that group cohesion is accomplished by singling somebody out, Girard says that what's the person that is singled out is somebody who's weak, and therefore they get scapegoated. Wrangham's theory is just the opposite. It's that the person that gets taken out is the bully who's quite aggressive and strong, and he's taken out by a coalition. And so it's really a mirror image of each other in some ways. But I wonder about whether the anti-bullying work that's done with children has any potential to spill over into group scapegoating, because in a way, when you're scapegoating a group in society, it's like you're bullying the whole group. You're being a bully to that whole group. So there's some connection there. That was just what I was thinking.
Steve, you brought up something that I think is terribly important, which is the difference between the individual and the training we can give to individuals and group dynamics. It's something that I think as social scientists we really haven't dealt with. I think training in schools, in homes, in churches, wherever it's going to be, about how to be a good person and how not to be a bad person can be pretty effective. I mean, if the kid has models in his life or her life, or direct instruction or interventions that enforce these things, it's perfectly possible to lay a good groundwork for sort of peaceful and constructive behavior as a single person. But as soon as it comes to group behavior, all these good people come together and their virtues become something different. They become loyalty to the brotherhood, vanquishing the enemy, getting rid of the evil, and so on and so forth. And this group phenomenon just replaces individual minds. So I think
we
teaching kids not to be bullies is great, but I don't think it'll affect group behavior.
And we teach high school students about the Holocaust, and we we tell them a lot about it, but we don't tell them why it happened. There's very little emphasis on the dynamics of why it happened, the psychological dynamics of why
What they
it
learned
happened.
is the Germans were bad guys in those days, but now
That's
they're
it.
good guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
And they,
yeah. But
yeah,
Steve,
it would be better to have the curriculum include the discussion of the Holocaust and then follow it up with some sort of discussion about what do you see operating in your own society
well,
right now that is similar.
well,
Maybe
Diane,
you could even start there.
yeah. Well, let me bring us back to this is from my psychoanalytic thinking about Freud and his. I think Diane, you've mentioned it in his what is it? The ego in group psychology. Remember, he doesn't pay attention to any of the sciences. He just makes it up, you know. But what he talks about is the in that group dynamic. I'm trying to remember how he talked about it. There were three major institutions: the church, the military. Anybody remember the three? And what he talks about in terms of okay, what he talks about is in group behavior, the since individuals need an ideal other to look up to, like in a bunch of wolves, that you have your major, the hierarchy guy. So in the military, you have your general. In religion, you have God, Jesus, Allah, somebody else. So that sacredness creates a dynamic where we're willing to sacrifice our own critical thinking and our own individual thinking for the greater, not for the greater good, but to conform to the sacred value. And then you have to give up critical thinking, and then you get this whole bunch of sameness. So I would say we have to, like you said, we have to address, Diane or Steve, the systemic issues. And one of them is maybe teaching the why, but and you read about it, especially in current times, at least in the mental health field, there's a whole about like systemic racism or systemic colonialism. And there are a lot of papers and talking about it, but nothing comes up that really people are being upstanders that I've seen. So that's the tricky part for, at least the way I think about this a lot. But yeah, but the giving up the individuality and holding on to one's own, I don't know how well we can make that happen. I mean, that's just my opinion. I haven't tried it, but I have enough trouble as a therapist, and Steve, you know, about helping people disidentify with their the explicit and implicit norms of the family of origin. And people carry that with them as an adult, and then they might pass it on, like some people who carry on the belief, I'm not good enough, or the group, the Jews, we're not good enough, or the Kurdish people, whoever else is being persecuted. Those people are maybe, they can be addressed somewhat, but what about the ones in charge who, like we have now, who are doing like, of course you're not good enough because we're better. We have a lot of money. We hang around with Trump. Okay, sorry, but over it, but it's a big thing, yeah.
I'm not able to restrain myself. Actually, you brought up the question of the Holocaust. And now in Israel, what we're seeing is a great enthusiasm for the idea of completely removing the Palestinian population from the West Bank and Gaza. And it seems to me such a tragic repetition with basically the same reasoning that was used against the Jewish people of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody talks about this.
Mm-hmm.
Not nobody, but I mean.
I'm sorry, Diane, I missed something. I just was reading the chat. What is nobody talking about? What's the specific entity? I just missed it.
The specific thing is what we mentioned several times, the Holocaust and the you know, destruction of the Jewish population in Germany. But now the Jewish population in Israel is pretty enthusiastic about doing away with the Palestinian population.
Mhm. Yeah.
There
And
is a
it's
major difference.
such a bitter irony.
Mm.
There is a
Yeah.
major difference, and that's that
Yes, there is a difference, which is
in
that
this particular
Hamas
instance,
has
yeah, Hamas attacked and killed over 1,000 people.
but there's a history there too of the oppression of
Yeah.
the Palestinian people since the
Oh,
founding
sure.
of
I mean,
Israel.
I say it's a minority of the Israeli population who thinks that they simply have always had a God-given right to take over the entire Levant,
Yeah.
and it's all theirs, and they don't need to make any consideration for people who lived there before, and that's
Well, look,
obviously
folks,
the
this is
basics.
of course, this is going to.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring this up as a political
No, it's
problem.
good, but I want to bring up something else that I just came across. Somebody turned me on to, I forget the guy's name, the book, but it was called, Ataturk, the guy who in the 20s was
Yes.
the leader, and it's called
Camille.
something about Ataturk and the Nazi imagination. I don't know if you know about that one, Diane, since
Not really.
it's amazing. And I'm not going to read it, but somebody's going to send me a summary. But he had the plan. I mean, whatever some people in Israel or Netanyahu are doing, he's probably that kind of guy. He probably read the Ataturk book, or Trump didn't read it, but he's got that instinct to do that. But yeah, we go to that extreme for that scapegoating, and then there's a plan to how to do it. So the final solution was not just Hitler. I mean, whatever they called it in German, but there are predecessors, and there were probably others in history.
I think there are many in the expansion of empires.
Yeah, right. It kind of goes with
history.
it. Yeah.
Well,
we have-
Diane, you're kind of suggesting there's an inextricable link between genocide and scapegoating.
Yeah.
That genocide is sort of scapegoating carried to the furthest extreme it could be, or are they
Possible.
different?
Yep. Steve, it's
I don't
probably in the Ataturk and the book, the plan, the game plan. It's there, but it's probably step 3. Or maybe it's step 2, but it's in the beginning. I mean, when you read these things, you got to have it in mind. You've got to be able to get people together to scapegoat through, and that's the way you scare the shit out of people. So they freeze, and there's a whole notion of I forget the fancy term, but pleasing the autocrat. Has anybody come across that in the literature? There's something about that we're wired as a group. Like when we're scared shit, we're not going to be afraid of the guy. We'll bow to him.
I see. Yeah.
I think to answer my own question, that they're not completely isomorphic, because although the genocide of the Jews, I think, is scapegoating, I'm not sure if the genocide of Native Americans was scapegoated. That was just more greed. I just think psychologically you can have genocide sometimes involves scapegoating, but I don't think it necessarily has to.
No, in
You mean
Rwanda, it was, for example.
Okay.
Wars are not scapegoating. Wars are conflict. And so, attacking and chasing out the native population, which was done all over the Americas, not just in the US or Canada. It was, yes, greed and the wish to subjugate and the wish to take over the land. I mean, it was just conflict.
It really is an interesting.
The scapegoat is within the group.
Yes.
No, it's out. No, it's in group and out group scapegoating.
It's in the group and has to be pushed out.
Initially, yes.
It's not an outside enemy. It's an inside enemy.
Right.
Oh, well.
So the enemy within.
Right.
Both.
I agree.
Steve, and I'm going to address it to everybody, but somebody said in the chat, I don't remember who, but it's so valuable. Do we continue this? So I just wanted to bring it up. Anybody see it? Whoever. Is that something we want to consider? Or we got so much else to do.
Which thing? I'm lost.
Okay, I'm
I
looking
don't know
at
what
it.
you're talking about, Hank.
I'll tell you in a second.
I think Hank is suggesting, do we want a second session on scapegoating?
Yeah, at some point, or
Or
somebody else
do we
brought it
have-
up.
Or
we
all
have
kinds
ideas?
of all kinds of conflict. I don't know.
Do we
Well, I
have
would
an
say,
idea for next month?
Steve, I have the idea, not for when, but it's about to answer to study, dialogue, your question. What do we do with that on a systems level?
Mm-hmm.
That would be where I would want it to go based on your wisdom. So I don't
echo
know.
that. That's what I was going to say. I agree with you, Hank.
Okay. Oh yeah, Tim said it. I don't know if.
Yeah.
Yeah, he asked for it. I appreciate the conversation. Would appreciate extending the conversation further. I look to future conversations in this community. Okay. So at least there's 3 of us who are interested in it that spoke directly. So Steve, I'm going to stay out of it now. This is just my one time, semi-leadership position.
Is there any other suggestion? I don't particularly want to lead that conversation. So if we're going to do that next month, somebody else would need to do it, or we could pick a different topic. I don't have a topic to suggest, believe it or not. I usually do have one, but I don't today.
Well, it'd be
Anybody?
interesting. It would be timely. We usually don't do this to extend it. I mean, it could fall flat,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
So
it's such a deep, visceral thing we're talking about. It's not just our brains or studies. It's like,
mhm.
and it's not, nobody's knocking on anybody's door yet here. But I have clients there who are minority groups and knocking on their door, whether it's
Yeah.
gay
I
folk.
feel the vice president gave a speech and called college professors the enemy.
Yeah, there you go.
Mhm.
Scary. I'm not
Yeah,
at
and you're one of them, right?
and I'm at a pretty prominent school. So
Mhm.
Yeah. Luckily, I'm not a college professor. They'll knock on your door, except I'm Jewish, so
well,
I
I'm
don't know if
Jewish
anybody.
too.
I mean, I'd be fine. I mean, it's such a, I just want to say one thing in this discussion. I realized that I didn't use that language. I used to call it the internal saboteur. La saboteur, but the self that undermines us, whatever you want to call it. So so it's helped me think about the internal scapegoat. That becomes, it's in the world of trauma. And I think it happens in groups, like I'm not good enough if Native American, or I don't think Black is beautiful work well enough yet for the Black folks in this country. So I'm open to it because it fascinates me at every level. And the ideas here are pretty good.
Psychotherapists, would you say that the underlying mechanism in scapegoating is projection?
Well, I
Can
don't know if I
be.
should get into it.
I would say it's anxiety reduction.
Yeah, but there's a guy, I don't know, I'll just say quickly, Steve, maybe others, have you read W.R.D. Fairbairn, the Scottish psychoanalyst?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
I'll use his language. It's called, let me see if I can translate it. He calls it making the bad object good. The object is an internal
Yeah, but
representation.
I don't want to have we should not be having a session on object relations theory.
Oh, no,
That's
no,
about
I just wanted to, no, somebody asked me a question, not a session.
Oh.
I just explained, I think that's down there. It's the parent system scapegoating the kid, and the kid can't tolerate the uncertainty of it. So they go, it's my fault. I think everybody has seen that. That's all.
Right. It's mommy's not bad, I'm bad.
Yeah, there you go.
That's the fair baron in a nutshell. But
Yeah, you got it.
I think if we have a discussion next month, that we really need to find something to read that talks about scapegoating at scale, how to combat scapegoating at scale. How do we combat a society's tendency to do this? And then we need to think a little bit about that. I mean, you know, part of
it
it,
needs to
part
be
of
a
it
little
is,
bit evolutionary.
yes.
Does it? Yeah.
So my only hesitancy is that might not be an easy thing to find.
I'll research it.
David Sampson's
To
book,
read.
Our Tribal Future, might have
Well, we
some
don't-
references. It's a
I've read
book, we
that.
can't read a whole book, but
I've
but
read
that-
that book, and I don't recall. I mean, what David's solution in that book really is to have a kind of meta tribe, and understand that we're all part of one big tribe, which I agree with. But it still begs the question of how do we get from A to B? How do
Steve,
we get
I
there?
got time to do that because it fascinates me on other levels. So I can do the
Okay.
research and talk to you about it. I mean, Steve has been very helpful to me to develop these things because like I'm a lecturer, what am I going to do? Even though I can run discussions, but so I'm learning, sort of the approach that Andy started. I just have a question. Does anybody remember? I have to look it up. Remember, Andy used to start the meetings way back and he'd suggest his framework for discussion. Does anybody I guess I should look it up in the early meetings because
Go watch a video.
I'll just watch a video. But Steve, if you're okay, I mean any others,
Sure.
I'll do it's easy to do the research nowadays. I'll just ask ChatGPT to give me all the stuff and maybe I can get summaries.
Sometimes it gives you weird answers.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've been practicing and I take stuff that I know that I'm very familiar with and I ask questions and they're pretty much like 90% useful, but I have to know the information.
Right.
I won't do it with something I don't know. Is that okay? Anybody else want to be part of it with Steve and I? I mean, I'll do the work. I'll send it over. People I'm happy. It's
Okay.
fascinating for me.
I've got to
Okay.
go. I've got to go. I
Steve,
look
what do you want to
forward
call
All
it?
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
good
Steve,
to
what should
see
we
you.
I
call
guess-
it?
Bye, Kathleen.
Combating scapegoating or fighting scapegoating, how to do it or something like that.
Combating systematic scapegoating. How's that?
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
I'll
good.
write it down. Thank you,
Okay.
folks. And
All right. Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye, all.